This is a true story I call Looking Back. It's about my previous phobia of animatronics and how I learned to overcome them through a certain game franchise. My story begins when I was about a year old. One of my mother's friends at the time invited her to bring me to a Chuck E. Cheese establishment for whatever reason. I don't really remember much, other than the animatronic rat, who spoke with a Bronx accent and toted around a cigar in those days, watched me intently. My mother even recalls Chucky lunging toward me. I'm not sure if this small event triggered my phobia of animatronics afterwards, but it was the first encounter of many. Around this time frame, my mother and Grandma purchased a beautiful bear I called Vicky. She wasn't the terrifying hybrid animatronic she would later become in my teen years, but I'm getting ahead of myself. For now, she was my comfort and only friend. As I grew older, I found that I didn't much care for robots. To me, if it wasn't alive and yet moved, there was something very wrong with it. There was no grounds for me feeling that way toward animatronics, since this was long before FNAF came out. But I suppose there's that one kid out of a group of children who would hide under a table or cry whenever they saw one. I just happened to be that kid. You name it, I was scared of it. My parents had a favorite restaurant when I was young, and guess what? It was the Rainforest Cafe. There were easily over 30 animatronics inside. Every time we went there, I begged with both my parents and the waiters for us to sit somewhere away from the robots, whether it was by the aquariums, or even by that waterfall with the golden man holding up a globe. Unfortunately, I didn't always get my way, which was 90% of the time. And those of you who have gone to the Rainforest Cafe know that it's a very loud, chaotic place. It wasn't even because it had the same environment like Chuck E. Cheese. While Cheese had kids running around, wild, swinging off of light fixtures and smashing their heads against arcade cabinets, Rainforest had big crowds of people. It's almost like every time we went to that place it was jam-packed. Near the entrance there was an animatronic alligator down in this ravine, and then when you pass through the gift shop you have to duck or risk being smacked upside the head by the robotic python hanging down from the fake tree in the center. But that was the least of my problems. The one animatronic we always ended up sitting by were the gorillas. Every 20 to 30 minutes, I'd say, they go ballistic and scream, because the restaurant would enter this thunderstorm mode, and I'd be crying and hugging my mom until they stopped. Yes, Rainforest Cafe held many unpleasant memories for me, but I'm not here to hate on the restaurant or blame the employees for what happened to me. If I'm being real here, I wouldn't mind going back there again one day, if it's still around, that is. Anyways, yeah. There was one time I was peeking down at the alligator, and my grandfather teasingly threatened to push me down there with it. I know he was joking, but I didn't find it funny at all. There was another time when one of the gorillas was missing its face, so I got an eyeful of its exoskeleton and we stared at each other down, basically for the rest of the day. And kind of like the FNAF 4 kid, I was taken to the cafe on my birthday once even though I didn't want to go. The upside was that the birthday boy or girl got something called a volcano, which was basically a volcano-shaped chocolate cake with sparklers poking out of it. That was a very good dessert, not gonna lie. The Rainforest Cafe we often went to was in a mall, and where there's malls, there's often more electronics than you could count. My parents were pushing my stroller through a Radio Shack one time, and we passed a very popular toy dinosaur. He was called the Roboraptor, and somebody must have left him in guard mode because as soon as I passed him, he snapped his jaws in my direction. I screamed so loud that my parents had to rush me out of the mall into the car. Vicky spent the rest of the day calming me down. It didn't even have to be a very complex robot to scare me either. I was given a little shirt once that had an animated butterfly on it, and all it did was flap its wings. That was still enough to make me rip my shirt off, scream crying. When I was about 8 or 9, my grandfather had bought a singing troutfish. You know, one of those things people sometimes hang on a wall for decoration. When he saw me have a panic attack over seeing it move, he tore it apart and showed me its wires and insides, insisting that it was just a machine and that I had nothing to worry about. I was almost convinced, too, until he turned it on. I ran all the way to one of the spare bedrooms in his house and blocked the door with my body. My grandfather was on the other side of it with the fish in his hand, trying to show me that nothing was going to hurt me. Long story short, I wasn't satisfied until he annihilated the thing and threw it out on the curb. My grandparents tried to think of a way to help me overcome my fear of animatronics. For a Christmas present, they gave me a for-real French chimpanzee. I was so horrified by it that the one time it caught me off guard, I threw it across the room, breaking one of its plastic ears off. My mom ended up donating it later. Then my family bought a rabbit named Jojo that plays hide-and-seek with people. I ended up kicking it down a flight of stairs, destroying it. So around this time, me and Vicky had gone our separate ways for about 5 or 6 years. I'm ashamed to say I didn't start thinking of her again until I was 14, but I'll go into that later. By the time I was a preteen, my phobia didn't improve. In fact, it was embarrassing. My family acted so done with me every time we walked down to Toy Island stores we went to. I would either run past the animatronics as quickly as I could, or freeze up and start hyperventilating. Me and my family had entered a store where, out front, they had a large sale of robotic dogs, because at the time it was very popular. As we went past them, each head turned to look at us. I couldn't help but feel a chill go down my spine. I think the worst episode I ever had involved my grandma. We were going by this dinosaur toy that had a big red "Try Me" button near the plastic case display. We were sitting there talking about it. I was saying something about how much I despised it, and Grandma was telling me that it was important that I overcame my fears because they were irrational. Then some nose-picking boy ran over and slammed the red button. As soon as the dinosaur started stomping around and roaring like it was about to break out of its case, I lost it. I climbed on top of my grandma, crying in front of all these strangers who looked at me like I was stupid. It was humiliating. Even worse, I bruised Grandma's arm a bit. I couldn't stand it anymore. There was many a time I contemplated running away. I'm not proud admitting that. Every night I'd cry myself to sleep wondering if I'd ever stop being such a coward. Then, when I was 14 years old, everything changed, and I got my chance at redemption. A man named Scott Cawthon created Five Nights at Freddy's. Upon so much as seeing an image of Bonnie, I almost stopped breathing. I very nearly shied away from clicking on the YouTube video, but somehow, for some reason, I did it anyway. The YouTuber was called Markiplier, and the video was titled "The Scariest Game in Years." So in a way, Markiplier introduced me to FNAF, and FNAF introduced me to Markiplier. All throughout the video, my palms got sweaty and I felt the tears come to my eyes. I tried all I could to keep it together so I wouldn't wake my parents up. And then a large red animatronic fox flew through the left door, startling us both. I held my breath, trembling like a chihuahua. Then Mark started screaming like it was the most insane thing that ever happened to him, and I couldn't help but laugh my fear away. I guess I found it funny that a man 11 years older than me was scared of animatronics too. In a way, I didn't really feel alone anymore. As time passed, I became interested in FNAF and learned the names of the animatronics. Soon the second game was released, and people started making songs and memes and animations of the games. Only, I found myself very sad again. Not because I was still a bit afraid of the animatronics, but because I happened to remember an old friend of mine. So when my mom saw me up one night crying, she asked me what was wrong, and I told her. And instead of getting impatient with me, she understood. We dug around in an old closet for a few minutes, and then Mom held up who we were looking for. Thankfully, storage had been very kind to Vicky. Delighted, I felt complete again. When I had Vicky, I didn't feel afraid anymore. When we were together, I felt ready to face the world. Please don't laugh. We've done everything together and been everywhere. I never let it get in the way of human relationships, but she's still my universe to this day. So with yet another Christmas on the way, I begged my parents for the FNAF games. I was so worried they'd say no, but then on Christmas Eve, my dad said he had a surprise for me and told me to turn on my computer. He did some poking around, then after waiting for a few minutes, he showed me what was on the home page. FNAF 1 and FNAF 2 were there, ready to play. "Merry Christmas," he told me with a smile. I gasped and gave him the biggest hug ever. We spent the night making cookies and watching movies. As impatient as I was to play the games, I knew family came first. The grandparents had their own surprise for me. It was the same Roboraptor that scared me as a child, but I didn't freak out. I stood my ground as they put in some batteries and powered it on. I ended up loving the Roboraptor and spent hours playing with it. And so, as you can see, Scott Cawthon changed my life. Even though he's retired now, I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for his well-thought-out and amazing game franchise. I've become a songwriter, storyteller, and artist because of him. I've gotten a collection of robotic toys, including a classic Teddy Ruxpin that I adore. One day I hope to get better at math and engineering so that I may work on animatronics myself. Unfortunately, as I am writing this, many animatronics are going the way of the dinosaur. For instance, Chuck E. Cheese went bankrupt not long ago, and they've gotten rid of their animatronics in exchange for a dance floor. And one of the rainforest cafes my family used to go to burned down. I don't know how long they'll be around either. But I wish to change that. Yes, there were animatronics when I was a kid. While they frightened me at the time, they brought joy and imagination to other children, and now they're going away. I can't imagine a world without them, though. I want to bring them back. I want to fix all the years I wasted running away from them, and spend more time studying, designing, and perhaps even building them. Though I'm a young adult now, my passion for robotics hasn't really changed. I hope to gain knowledge of electrical engineering and software designing in order to accomplish my goals. And that's the story of how my robophobia was cured by a certain game franchise, and how said franchise inspired me to dream bigger. Thank you, Scott.